I always thought the worst part of losing my wife would be the loneliness. I was wrong. The worst part was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. No, this was different. It was unnatural, heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. And some nights I swore I could hear something in the silence. At first, it was just small things. A door slightly open when I was sure I had closed it. The scent of her perfume lingering in the air when I hadn't touched the bottle in months. The feeling that someone was standing just behind me, only for me to turn and see nothing. Then came the window, and everything changed. I live on an isolated farm, miles from the nearest town. My wife and I had bought the house 20 years ago, and after she passed, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Her old bedroom, the one she had spent her last days in, remained untouched. I kept the door closed, her belongings exactly as they were. A part of me thought it would help me heal. It didn't. The first time I saw movement in the window, I was outside stacking firewood. The sun had just set, and the farmhouse windows glowed warmly in the dim light. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and glanced up and froze. A shadow moved behind the curtain of my wife's bedroom. The figure was tall, slender, not distinct but undeniably there. My chest tightened. I was alone, no visitors, no family nearby, and I knew without a doubt that the house had been empty when I stepped outside. I dropped the firewood and ran inside, my boots thudding against the wooden porch. My breath came in ragged gasps as I grabbed a hunting knife from the kitchen and slowly made my way down the hall. The door to my wife's room was shut. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the handle. Then I turned the knob and swung the door open. The room was exactly as I had left it. No footprints in the dust, no signs of movement, just the bed, the nightstand, the faded scent of lavender. The only thing out of place? The curtains. They were swaying. Not from a draft. The window was shut. No air was moving, but they swayed, like someone had been standing. Behind them just seconds before, watching me, I slammed the door and locked it. That night I hardly slept. The next few days were uneventful. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that my mind was playing games with me. But then one night I heard the footsteps. They started at exactly 2:37 a.m. soft, deliberate, coming from the hallway. I sat up in bed, my pulse roaring in my ears. The sound was clear, distinct, the slow creak of old wooden floors, moving from one end of the house to the other. Step by step by step. Then they stopped. Right outside my bedroom door, I held my breath, gripping the blankets. My mind raced. Was it an intruder, an animal, a dream? I reached for my phone, but it was dead. The charger, which I always plugged in before bed, had been unplugged, and then the door handle moved. It wasn't subtle. It twisted, shaking violently. For a brief second before stopping altogether, I bolted out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my nightstand, and yanked the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but my wife's bedroom door, it was wide open, and the window inside, unlocked again. By this point, I was beyond disturbed. I installed new locks, reinforced the windows, and set up motion-activated floodlights around the property. If someone or something was getting inside, I was going to catch them. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then one night I woke up to the feeling of cold air against my face. I sat up, disoriented. My blankets were missing, and then I saw her, a woman standing in the doorway. She was pale, too thin, her long hair falling. Over her face in tangled strands. Her dress, dirty, tattered, familiar. It was my wife's dress. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me. I grabbed the bat, but the second I moved, she bolted. Her bare feet slammed against the wooden floor as she ran down the hallway, toward my wife's room. By the time I reached the door, she was gone, the window wide open. I called the police the next morning. They searched the house, the farm, the woods beyond the property. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the dirt. They told me it was probably a drifter, someone looking for shelter who panicked when I woke up. I wanted to believe them. But then I checked the security footage. At 3:14 a.m., the cameras picked up movement. The footage showed the house, still, silent, until a shadow appeared in my wife's window. It moved closer, pressing up against the glass, watching me. Then, slowly, the figure backed away and melted into the darkness. The police never found her, but I kept watching the footage over and over again, and that's when I noticed something. At the very beginning of the video, before the figure appeared, something else moved. Inside the house, the door to my wife's room opened on its own, as if welcoming her in. I never saw her again, but I still sleep with the lights on, because every so often in the dead of night, I hear soft footsteps in the hallway, and I wonder, what if she never left? There's something unsettling about late-night shifts. When most of the world is asleep, the roads feel too empty, too silent, like you're moving through a world that's just slightly out of sync with reality. I used to enjoy that quiet until the night I realized I wasn't alone, and that someone had been watching me for miles. It started like any other shift. I worked as a warehouse supervisor, meaning long hours, late nights, and an exhausting routine. I finished my shift at 2 a.m., too tired to cook, but hungry enough to stop for something quick. There was a 24-hour McDonald's a few miles from the warehouse, the only place open at that hour. I had been there countless times before, but that night, the moment I pulled into the parking lot, something felt off. There were only a few cars scattered around, most of them empty. The drive-through was dead. The entire place had that eerie, deserted quality that only places open past midnight seem to have. But one car stood out, a dark blue Volkswagen Jetta parked near the edge of the lot. The engine was running, and though the windows were tinted, I could feel it. Whoever was inside was watching me. I told myself I was just being paranoid. It was just another customer, someone waiting for their food, maybe scrolling on their phone. Still, I kept an eye on the car as I ordered and waited for my food. The Volkswagen never moved, but something wasn't right. The moment I stepped outside with my bag of food, I noticed it. The brake lights flickered on, then off, like someone was testing them. I walked to my car, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The Volkswagen didn't move. I exhaled sharply. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just exhausted. I pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward home. That's when I saw the headlights appear in my rearview mirror, and my stomach dropped. The Volkswagen was following me. At first, I tried to stay calm. It was just a coincidence, right? We were probably heading in the same direction. But after 5 miles, every turn I made, the car made. Every time I switched lanes, it followed. Then came the real test. There's a nature preserve just outside town. It's secluded, with a small gravel lot leading to a few hiking trails. I wasn't planning on stopping there, but I needed to know. At the last second, I flicked on my turn signal and pulled into the parking lot. The Volkswagen, it drove right past. I exhaled in relief. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the Volkswagen slowed down. The brake lights flashed red. Then it reversed, straight into the lot, right behind me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I watched the car roll to a stop. The lot was dark, empty, surrounded by dense trees. There were no streetlights, no cameras, no one to see what was about to happen. I locked my doors. The Volkswagen idled for a few seconds. Then, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in black. He stood there, motionless, watching me. Then the passenger door opened, and another man got out, then another, and another. 4 men, all staring at me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. What the hell was this? A carjacking, a mugging, something worse? I had 2 choices. Wait to see what they wanted or get the hell out of there. I chose the second. I threw the car into reverse, tires skidding against the gravel, then spun the wheel, slamming on the gas. The Volkswagen's engine roared to life. They were following me again. I tore down the road, my mind racing. I needed to think. I couldn't drive straight home. If they were dangerous, I wasn't leading them to my house. I pulled out my phone, trying to dial 911, but my hands were shaking too much. I barely managed to hit the call button before a shadow moved in the trees. My stomach flipped. There was someone else in the woods, watching. I barely had time to register it before the Volkswagen's high beams flashed, blinding me in the mirror. Then the car swerved, trying to cut me off. I slammed on the brakes, barely missing them. I needed help. Now and then I remembered. My friend Jake lived just a few minutes away. His place had a long drive driveway, floodlights and security cameras. I floored it. By the time I reached Jake's house, my pulse was hammering. I pulled in fast, honking the horn like a madman. The porch light flicked on. Jake stepped outside, confused, but the moment he saw my face, his expression changed. Then he saw the Volkswagen at the end of the driveway. I scrambled out of my car. "Call the cops," I gasped. Now, Jake didn't ask questions. He went inside, grabbed his rifle and pointed it toward the car. The Volkswagen idled for a few seconds. Then it sped off. The police arrived 20 minutes later. I told them everything. Then something chilling happened. When I described the Volkswagen and the men, one of the officers exchanged a look with his partner. "You said the driver had a restraining order against him?" I asked. The officer hesitated, then nodded. He was involved in a harassment case a few years back, stalking, following people home. I felt sick, and the others. The officer didn't answer, but his silence was enough. They had done this before, and they'd do it again. To this day, I don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were planning to rob me, maybe something worse. But one thing still haunts me. When I think back to that night, to the Volkswagen, the men, the hidden figure in the trees, I wonder, were they really following me, or was I just another name on their list? Every town has one, that one place the locals warn you about. The place with too many stories, too many tragedies, too many secrets buried beneath its foundations. For us, it was St. Mary's Chapel. The church had been abandoned for decades, sitting in the middle of nowhere, miles from town. No one ever talked about it. It wasn't listed in any historical records, and asking the locals about it only got you nervous glances and vague excuses. Some said it had burned down years ago, killing everyone inside. Others claimed it was used for rituals, a place where something evil had been summoned. But the most common story, anyone who entered never came out the same. Of course, my friends and I were idiots, so we went anyway. It was a cold November night when we pulled up to the ruins. There were 5 of us. Me, Jake, Luis, Tyler, and Emma. The church sat in the middle of an overgrown field, its skeletal remains silhouetted against the moonlight. The wood was rotting, the stained glass windows long shattered. There was no sign of life, just an overwhelming stillness, like the place was holding its breath. Luis laughed nervously. "Well, we're here. Who's going in first?" Emma, the bravest of us, stepped forward and shined her flashlight at the front doors. They were still standing but warped, the wood blackened by what looked like old burn marks. "Looks like the fire story was true," she muttered. I swallowed hard. "Let's just get this over with." We climbed through a broken window and dropped inside. And that's when the atmosphere changed. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and freezing cold. The wooden pews were scorched and splintered. Some flipped over, as if they had been abandoned mid-service. The altar at the front was barely recognizable, just a charred slab of wood, the cross above it broken, hanging tilted at an unnatural angle. "This place is messed up," Jake muttered. Luis pulled out his phone. "I'm going to take some pictures." His flash illuminated the far end of the church, and that's when I saw it. A door. It was partially hidden behind a collapsed beam, a rusted metal door, untouched by the fire. Emma noticed it too. "What kind of church has a metal door?" Tyler walked over and grabbed the handle. "Let's find out." The second his fingers touched the metal, the door slammed shut, hard, too hard, like someone had kicked it from the other side. We all froze. Then a loud creaking noise echoed through the church, not from the door. From above us, we pointed our flashlights upward. The rafters groaned as if something was shifting in the ceiling. That's when Luis whispered, "I think we should leave." For once, no one argued. As we turned to climb back through the window, we heard it. A voice, soft, feminine, a single word, "Stay." I felt ice crawl down my spine. Emma whipped around. "Who said that?" No one answered, because we all knew the truth. The voice hadn't come from any of us. It had come from the darkened hallway beyond the metal door. We bolted. Jake climbed through the window first, then Luis, then Tyler. Emma was right behind me when she suddenly stopped. Her flashlight was pointed at the altar, and her face was pale. "There's something there," she whispered. I turned. For a split second, I didn't see it. Then, movement. A shadow shifted behind the broken cross. Something was watching us. and it was grinning. I grabbed Emma's arm. "Move!" We scrambled through the window and ran for the car. Tyler fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and finally the engine roared to life. As we sped away, I dared one last glance at the church. And there, in the second-floor window, barely illuminated by the moonlight, a silhouette stood, watching us go. We never spoke about that night again, but sometimes I dream about St. Mary's Chapel, and in those dreams, I'm still inside, and I never make it out.